It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control the discussion today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Tuesday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day. And as a reminder to you, we are free and available for you on all platforms, including YouTube. Today's episode of Locked On Bills is presented by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. You can pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. Well, folks, we've got some great herd mentality questions to get into today, but a couple of newsy items first. And I will state that I'm recording this podcast at 4:30 p.m. on Monday, August 29th. And so if there's any big news that happens between the time you're listening to this and then, it's not covered in this podcast. And I know it's that time of year where the Bills could make roster moves at any point in time, but at some point you got to push record and get the podcast out, and that's where we're at right now. But we did find out on Monday morning that Brett Kern, the Titans punter that we speculated would be released on the podcast yesterday, was released. And slam dunk choice for me, for the Bills to find their punter. He's a little bit older, 36 years old, but I think over the last decade, this guy's probably been the best punter in the NFL. And they found a nice young player in Stonehouse, the kid out of Colorado State. The Titans saved some money by moving on from Kern. And I think the Bills should really, really go after him and solidify the punting situation. Also, Sam Martin of the Denver Broncos was also released. He's 32 years old. He spent the last 2 seasons with Denver as their punter, 2013 through 2019 with the Lions as their punter. He's had a good career. 4.37 seconds average hang time, 46 yards of net average, average 41.3 net average for his career across 614 punts. He's had a good career. And so just another option, right? And the Broncos released him because he refused to take a pay cut. So between Brett Kern and Sam Martin and Jordan Berry and Kevin Huber, who's likely to be cut, I mean, there are options. I think that's the most important thing to be reminded of here, that the Bills have a hole at punter, but there are so many proven veteran options that they really should be able to get this figured out, and we can stop talking about punters. The Bills also released their first few cuts. Offensive lineman Jacob Capra, offensive lineman Tanner Owen, wide receiver Neil Pau'u, defensive end Daniel Joseph, defensive back Jordan Miller, and defensive back Josh Thomas. None of those are surprises, but the Bills at least got the first handful of cuts out of the way on Monday, and there are 20 more coming. So a lot between now and Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Real quick, also a quick programming note. This will be the last episode of Herd Mentality until September 12th. So just the way that the calendar falls with the Bills playing next week on Thursday and some concepts that I want to work in between now and then and the reaction to the game, we won't be able to get to Herd Mentality next week. So the next time we get to it will be after the Rams game, the Monday after. So just be mindful of that. If you're sending stuff in, it's got to be something that has some evergreenness to it, or it won't really fall into the schedule, if that makes sense, because the next time we're going to do Herd Mentality is after that Rams game. So maybe holster some things and get them in post Rams game that I will get to for that Monday podcast after on September 12th. All right, folks, let's get into these questions. First one today comes from Franklin, who says, you mentioned in the Bills-Panthers preseason recap episode that you would explore getting Christian Benford on the field by playing him as a safety. And that possible scenario really intrigued me. Given Benford's physical profile and what he's put on tape playing corner, do you envision Benford being a long-term center fielder type free safety replacement for Micah Hyde, or being a long-term bruiser type safety replacement for Jordan Poyer in the long term? Am I discounting the safety depth the Bills already have? Would love to hear you dive deeper on the Benford at safety idea. Appreciate this opportunity. So first of all, I said this right after the Bills drafted Christian Benford, so this isn't necessarily a new idea. For me, it's just what's the pathway to get him on the field? I mean, this guy earned first-team reps as a 6th-round pick out of Villanova this training camp. You got something here. You got something you like. Well, you've also got Trey White at one corner and Kyer Elam, your first-round pick, at another corner. Oh, by the way, Dane Jackson. Taron Johnson's in the slot. What's the path to get Christian Benford on the field? And to me, that comes at safety, where there's a clearer path given the contract status of Jordan Poyer. So the initial part of your question was, do I envision him as more of a Poyer replacement or a Hyde replacement? I would say a Poyer replacement. I think he's got that size, 209 pounds, that quick processing instinct to play down low a little bit more. Now, what intrigues me about this entire safety discussion for Christian Benford, that I feel like I'm probably the only one talking about, is he does give you size. He gives you ball production. His ball production at Villanova was unbelievable. And that intrigues me a lot. And so without there being a path at corner, I just feel like this is a logical idea. This is a prototype that really Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde came from as converted corners to safety. And I think Christian Benford can kind of just fall in line there. Take this season to provide good depth on the outside at corner. And then you kind of start thinking about where everything settles after the season. If you're able to bring back Poyer, well, then that's not really going to be a clear path. But you do have Jaquan Johnson as an expiring contract. So there's a lot of dominoes that need to fall. I just feel like if the Bills really have a player here that's a diamond in the rough, the pathway for him to get on the field is just not going to be at corner unless there's injuries. And so I just feel like it's a logical idea to really start thinking about safety beyond this season as a place that Christian Benford can get on the field and provide an impact for this football team. Obviously, special teams as a depth player is going to be important right away. But long term, where he can probably really help this team is at safety. Tony says, I'm hearing a lot of folks saying the Bills' backfield will be a three-headed beast, with Singletary being the lead back, Cook mixing in and playing on passing downs, and Moss as the goal line back. What am I missing here? Seems like we consistently start Taiwan Jones and two traditional running backs. Do you think there's a realistic chance we dress another guy? If so, which position would you predict would take the hit in terms of depth? Tony, this is a great talking point. This is a great talking point. Because you're exactly right. The Bills have typically dressed two running backs and Taiwan Jones. And that's it. They don't dress three running backs. Devin Singletary and Zach Moss plus Taiwan Jones with Matt Breida or TJ Yeldon as an inactive player. And I think the Bills have actually kind of struggled to get more than one back going at any one time. Now, I'm hopeful that with the new coaching influences that are in place now on this offense and a better approach and better communication and a better design and thought and ideology to the run game, that can be better. But going from 1 to 3 is kind of crazy, right? When you've struggled to get two going at any given point in time with any level of consistency. So I do think that we need to be honest about this and understand that between Singletary, Cook, and Moss, that one of them is likely to be an inactive player on game day. Especially when you think about what is Zach Moss's value, right? It's the power running components. It's the short yardage. Well, you got Josh Allen. You got Reggie Gilliam. And I mean, Devin Singletary's not necessarily a slouch in those situations either. Zach Moss does give you pass blocking ability, but Devin Singletary's no slouch as a pass blocker. So I think it is a good point to bring up that dressing 3 running backs, dressing Singletary, Cook, and Moss is kind of a stretch, especially when none of them give you any value on special teams. You can't dress a third running back that doesn't help you on teams. Of course, not including Tywan Jones, who literally dresses 4 teams. So yeah, Tony, I think you got a great point here. Something that we need to be mindful of. Mark says, I have loved your insights into roster construction. I would really appreciate your thoughts on practice squad construction. Is it just the best players we weren't able to keep on the active roster? Is it position specific? Does it depend on the makeup of your 53-man roster? Any insight would be greatly appreciated. Appreciate this question, Mark. I love talking roster construction. I think it's probably a combination of all the things that you mentioned. You want to be able to retain your best players that you can't roster. You want to be mindful of positions and numbers, right? Like if you're going to go light at a position, if you're going to go 5 linebackers, you're going to want to make sure you've got some dudes on the practice squad. If you're going to go light at tight end, you want to make sure you got some guys on the practice squad, defensive tackle, whatever positions you're going to go light on, you want to make sure that you've got some options that you can call up on game days. So it's your best players. It's being mindful of numbers. I think those are kind of the things at the forefront of your mind. You want to have those hedges. You want to have a Cam Lewis, right? The Bills have been doing this. Cam Lewis waiting in the wings. Eli Anku waiting in the wings. You can pull him up at any given point in time. They help your football team. Some of the linebackers, Joe Giles Harris last year, several times getting called up and helping the Bills on special teams. So I think you're being mindful of a number of variables, but numbers and talent obviously at the forefront. And now that you have this call-up stuff, you know, your practice squad in some ways is an extension of your active roster. And so I think you're going to want some balance. You know, you want to have options, but specifically at positions where you might have went a little bit lighter on, you want to make sure you have a nice hedge with players on the practice squad that you're willing to call up and, you know, maybe even be on your active roster for an extended period of time based on the way that some of the injury stuff could shake out. With the NFL season right around the corner, I can't wait to make entries over at PrizePicks. PrizePicks is my favorite daily fantasy resource. How does it work? You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they go score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. That includes NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, men's college basketball, women's college basketball, soccer, WNBA, esports, NASCAR, tennis, MMA, boxing, disc golf, Euro basketball, cricket, and more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's literally that easy. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time listeners can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter that promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an initial deposit match up to $100. Here's a fun question from Max. He says, what do you expect the Bills' first offensive play to be this year? I thought about this for probably longer than I should have. And I settled on a screen pass. The reason? I think you want to do something right away to slow down Aaron Donald. He's going to be firing off the ball, getting into the backfield, trying to disrupt Josh Allen. All right, cool. Here's a screen pass. I would definitely be thinking about that. And I say screen pass pretty openly. That could be to Devin Singletary, James Cook, Dawson Knox. I'd be thinking about the best way to catch them being aggressive on that opening snap and get yourself in a position to have a screen. And if it's not there, Josh Allen, just throw it away. 2nd and 10, go from there. But I think I'm in favor of the idea of just the juices, right? The adrenaline's going to be flowing. Opening night for the NFL. Catch them off guard. Catch them trying to be aggressive. Catch them trying to put the Bills behind the sticks on that first play and run a screen. And then also it forces them to make a tackle, right? Like teams are probably going to be a little rusty tackling right away. So get an athlete in space, James Cook, Dawson Knox, Devin Singletary, and put some stress on them right away to be disciplined and tackle. Justin says, I see a ton of Bills Mafia putting AJ Epenesa at defensive end 5 or wanting to trade him. I don't understand this. It's year 3 for him and good reports from camp and, of course, the Denver game. What are your thoughts on him and what he can do this year with his skill set to impress everyone? Well, first of all, please accept that this team views AJ Epenesa as defensive end 3. Everything that's happened this entire offseason, and especially in the preseason and training camp, tells us that the first guy off the bench after Von Miller and Greg Rousseau is AJ Epenesa. He's defensive end 3. So you're just wrong. If you think he's defensive end 5, you're wrong. You haven't paid attention to what this team has done because they've told you that he's defensive end 3. So let's establish that first and foremost. Secondly, what am I expecting? What are my thoughts? What can he do to impress everyone? Well, first of all, I think it's good that AJ Epenesa is no longer going through body transformations, right? This guy's a 280-pound defensive end at Iowa. He gets down to 250. All of a sudden, you're not a compression. You don't have that same mass. You don't have that same, I'll say mass again, but to convert speed to power, you don't have the same tool bag. You have to relearn your game. You're trying to be a quick player. Well, that's not who you are. Put a little bit of that bulk back on. Spend some time with Von Miller. Gets his confidence back, right? We heard Leslie Frazier talk about that last year as an issue for him, is that he just kind of was inconsistent, and part of that was just confidence. And so it's all right there. It's year 3. The expectations are there. He's earned that defensive end 3 spot. He's going to play 35, 40% of the snaps. It's all right there in front of him. He's got to go out there and show that he has acclimated himself to his body type, that he's incorporated the technique necessary to win under his new traits, and go out there and do it. I'm not promising you that he's going to be a double-digit sack guy and this big-time impact player. But can he be a player that we're satisfied with 35, 40% of the snaps spelling Von Miller and Greg Rousseau? I think he can get there. The next one comes from Grandpa Don, my grandfather. If you guys recall, when I was in Buffalo for camp, I did a couple of episodes from his office, and he joins us. He literally sent me a DM on Twitter, just like everyone else. He just followed right in line. He said, why did Matt Barkley have to change helmets when he was punting? Is there someone on the Bills field with the communication helmet? And a third question, if the Bills are going to fake a punt, does the quarterback need to have the communication helmet on? All right, so the reason why Matt Barkley had to change his helmets when he was punting is because only one player on the field can wear the green dot helmet at any given point in time, which is the communication helmet to the coaching staff. And the Bills had a linebacker on the punt team already in place, so Matt Barkley had to change his helmet. We can have one player with the green dot on the field at a time. And the green dot helmet would not be required for a fake punt at all. You can call that play if you want to, regardless of who's on the field and what helmets they have on. And technically, teams can pick any player they want to have the green dot, but it can only be one player on the field at a time. It doesn't limit or allow you to do anything more or less because you have a player with the green dot helmet on at any given point in time. But typically, that's obviously the quarterback or the Mike linebacker as the guys that get the play calls from the sideline, and you want to be in communication with the coaching staff. Are you one of those people who thinks it's okay to drive stoned? What's the worst that can happen? You end up driving below the speed limit? It's no big deal, right? Wrong. The truth is your reaction times slow way down when you're high. You not only put yourself in danger, but everyone around you. Talk about a buzzkill. Stop kidding yourself. It's not okay to drive high. If you've been using marijuana in any form, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different. Drive high, get a DUI. All right, let's get to some more of these questions. The next one comes from Bills Mafioso, who says, who would you say are the top 3 pound for pound hardest hitters on the Buffalo Bills? Also, I'm considering trying cold wings to see what the hype is all about. All right, this is fun. Well, first of all, let's start with the cold wings because I'm all the way in on cold wings. Big fan of them. Now, first of all, rarely ever do I have leftover chicken wings, so let's be honest about that. But when I do, I love the cold wings because it's like a different experience. You have your normal hot wings and you have your blue cheese. You love it. It's messy. It's phenomenal. But then you want to have those leftovers. And if you're like me, you don't want those leftovers to sit for long, right? You don't want them getting all nasty in the fridge. So I like to eat them within a relatively quick period of time. And what I like about the cold wings is that it feels like I'm having a different experience. It's not the same. It's like a different texture. It tastes a little bit different, and it just works. Cold chicken wings works. I'm all the way in on this idea. So if you happen to be in a scenario where somehow you have leftover wings, I encourage you to try it because I'm a big fan of the cold wings. I'm a big fan of like cold meat in general. Like I enjoy grilled chicken cold the next day. I enjoy, well, I guess just chicken because I don't like steak cold, but steak heating up is weird. But I also don't ever have leftover steak. So basically just chicken. It's basically just chicken. All right, so let's get to the other part of this, which was my top 3 pound for pound hardest hitters on the Buffalo Bills. All right, here's who I picked. And I focused in on density, right? Because I think your ability to hit hard often stems from your leverage, your density, the density of your build, and your low center of gravity. And so the guys that came to mind for me were Ed Oliver, Devin Singletary, and Jordan Poyer. I think those 3 guys, pound for pound, are the hardest hitters on the Buffalo Bills. Now, I also solicited some other feedback, and I did a tweet through the Locked On Bills account on Twitter where like several people chimed in with their answers, but I want to highlight 2 answers in particular. The first one is Bruce Nolan. I reached out to him independently and I said, hey, man, I got this question. What 3 players come to mind for you? Because I'm interested in seeing if we have any overlap. And Bruce, of course, responded with his methodology, right? Because what does he say? I don't remember what he says. Something about the why and how is more important interrogatives than what or whatever Bruce always says. So he's like, well, of course I focused in on an equation of mass times acceleration equaling force because that's going to tell me who the hardest hitting players are. So I focused on the largest players that move the fastest. All right, you know how Bruce is. And his choices were Spencer Brown, Tremaine Edmonds, and Von Miller. So I understand where he's coming from. Force equals mass times acceleration. He said, I took the largest players moving the fastest. All right, makes sense. Spencer Brown, Tremaine Edmonds, Von Miller. I asked my brother Frank, who is a really smart football guy. I'll tell you that. I talk a lot of the things you hear me say are influenced by him. And our conversations over the last, 30 years talking football and talking Bills football. His choices were Jaquan Johnson, Taron Johnson, and Matt Milano. Zeus says, I enjoyed your discussions about the punter vacancy yesterday and have a question about a guy I see lobbying on social media for the gig. Jake Schum has been vocal for a few years now, looking to land the job here in Buffalo. What do you know about him, and is he a possibility? Well, I know that he was a punter for the University of Buffalo. He lives in Buffalo. He tweets a lot. Looks like he's in great shape. And he hasn't punted in an NFL game since 2016 and has just 2 years of experience. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that the NFL doesn't get things wrong. But, I mean, he hasn't punted since 2016 in the NFL after 2 years of experience. Like, the NFL has told you that they've moved on from Jake Schum. He's not a guy. And so it would be extremely odd if this were to come to fruition. But I certainly understand him. I mean, he's got this fitness brand. You know, he's rallying Bills Mafia on Twitter, local guy. Like, he's pushing all the right buttons. I understand what he's doing. But there's no way that I'm considering a punter that has 2 years of experience in the NFL and hasn't punted in a game since 2016 in the year 2022. No. The last one here comes from Tim. Had another one sent in by Toby. They're very similar. And I'm sure a lot of people are thinking about this, especially as we are on the doorstep of final cuts being due. Tim says, what's the difference between the PUP list and injured reserve? I know a player starting the year on injured reserve is out for the year. How is the PUP different? All right, so I want to share this information for everyone to hear. And I'm pulling this directly from an article on The Athletic written by Larry Holder, who, look, I could sit here and summarize this myself, but he did a phenomenal job. And so I just kind of want to share the information with you right now in the podcast. So what are the active PUP list rules? A player can only be placed on the PUP list before the start of training camp. You hear that? That's very important. A player can only be placed on the PUP list before the start of training camp. The player counts against the 90-man roster limit and can come off the PUP list at any point during camp and practice immediately. The player cannot return to the PUP list if he sustains a setback or another injury during training camp. So basically, the PUP list is reserved for players that enter training camp with an injury already, right? Because if you practice that first day of training camp, you are no longer eligible to go on the PUP list. So guys like Tre'Davious White got injured last season. He's a perfect candidate for the PUP list. Ike Bucker, same thing. Guys that get injured during workouts in February, March, April, anything before camp, you put them on the PUP list if they're not able to practice on day one. So players can participate in team meetings. They can use the facilities during the preseason while on the PUP. They can work on the sidelines during practices, but they cannot participate in any portion of practice, whether that's walkthroughs, individual drills, 7-on-7s, or team drills. All right, so that's what that is. Now, that's the active PUP list. Then there's the reserve PUP list, which a player can receive this designation if he's still on the active PUP list by the time teams cut training camp rosters down to 80 players, which was August 23rd this year. A player doesn't count towards the roster limit once shifted to the reserve PUP. So this is Ike Bucker. This is an example of Ike Bucker. Teams have until rosters are cut down to 53 players, which is August 30th, tomorrow, to move a player to reserve PUP. The player has to remain in the reserve PUP list for at least the first 4 regular season games, which is new this season. Once a player leaves the reserve PUP list, he has up to 21 days to return to the 53-man roster. He can practice with the team until he's taken off the list. If the player still isn't able to play in games after the 21-day span, he'll stay on the reserve PUP list for the rest of the season. So this is kind of what the Bills are dealing with Trey White. They're probably, if they're not going to activate him, they're going to put him on this reserve PUP list. He'll be out 4 games, and then, or he'll have to be out a minimum of 4 games, and the Bills can activate him to the roster once he returns to practice. And then he doesn't count towards the roster limit. So what's the difference between reserve PUP and injured reserve? A player who lands on injured reserve can also return after 4 games, which the league changed this offseason, but only if placed on IR after the cut down to 53-man rosters. A player placed on IR before the cut down to 53 must either miss the season or negotiate an injury settlement with his team to become a free agent, at which point he can join another team, but not the same team. Teams can put a player on IR with the designation to return at any point throughout the regular season. So after the deadline here tomorrow at 4:00 or today at 4:00, whenever you're listening to this, throughout the regular season and postseason, active PUP list designations only occur before the start of training camp. Teams are allowed to have 8 players returned to the roster from IR starting this season. Last year, teams had an unlimited number of players that can return off IR due to COVID protocols. A player is allowed to return from injured reserve a maximum of twice per season, but each return would count against the 8-player allotment. Starting August 31st, a team can designate players to return later in the season off injured reserve. No reinstatement may occur in the last 5 weeks of the regular season through the postseason. So hopefully that made sense to you. You can only go on the PUP list before the start of training camp. If you're put on injured reserve before their roster cut down, you're out for the season. You can't play for that team again that year. You can be put on the PUP list and return after 4 games. You can be put on injured reserve after the 53 cut down. You can return after 4 games, but only 8 players a year can do that. But again, the caveat, you can only be put on the PUP list before the start of training camp. Hopefully that answers everyone's questions about the difference between the active or the injured reserve in the PUP list, which is very relevant given the status of Ike Bucker and Trey White for this football team. All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. Tomorrow, we will react to the cuts that the Bills make. They're going to make 20 more cuts. There could be some roster gymnastics like we talked about in the Monday podcast. So we're going to break it all down tomorrow. There could be some trades. There's some rumors out there about Zach Moss, rumors out there about O.J. Howard. So we'll get to all of that on the podcast tomorrow. The Bills might sign a punter. So we have a lot to talk about. Come on back. Make sure that you're subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.